Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Hey, podcast family, it's Jess, and welcome to the Living Out Loud podcast. I have some very exciting news. My new ebook, Breaking Free, Healing from Narcissistic Abuse and Reclaiming Your Power, is officially available for download. I wrote this ebook for anyone who was raised by narcissistic or emotionally immature parents, for anyone who has suffered through the silent treatment, for anyone who was called oversensitive, or for anyone who grew up emotionally starved. I wrote this ebook for the same kids who turn into adults chasing the same type of love they were shown growing up. For individuals who find themselves in psychologically abusive relationships where they are gaslit, punished, and then find themselves begging for connection after their abusive partners pull away. I know firsthand how insane this can make you feel and the impact it can have on your mental health. And I'm here to tell you that you're not crazy and you're definitely not alone. I have poured everything I know about narcissistic abuse into this ebook, and it's packed with exercises and journal prompts to help you go from hopeless, anxious, and depressed to empowered, boundaried, and clear about who comes in or out of your life. This ebook will explain the different types of narcissists, the many ways abuse can appear, and help you set boundaries and get your confidence back. If you're ready to jump in, you can find the ebook download link in the show notes of this episode, or you can head on over to my website, www.jessphillipscoaching.com, and purchase it straight from there. And if you're looking to do more intensive one-on-one work with me live each week, you can head on over to the contact page of my website and fill out a submission form. Now, let's get back to the show. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips. You know, guys, I picked today to record a bunch of episodes, and you know when things are just like not working out for you and you kind of have to push through anyways? My background is like all fuzzy, tried everything to fix it. No idea why. The blur is not on my screen. And I'm just not gonna let it get to me, because if I spend too much time trying to figure this shit out, then I'm not going to record these episodes and I'm just going to let everything spiral. So we're just going with it. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and that's fine. So today I want to talk about the art of co-regulation. So this was a topic sent in by a friend of mine, who is currently in a relationship. Actually, I think it was her partner that ended up suggesting it on their drive into Montreal. So I'm assuming they want some questions answered on how to learn how to co-regulate in relation to another person. And I've definitely talked about this on the podcast before. It's quite a hot topic, specifically with clients of mine, because at the end of the day, we're all so different. And especially once you get into a relationship with someone and the honeymoon phase kind of dies down a little bit, you're left with two people who may have very different ways of regulating themselves, regulating in interpersonally with another person, who have their own traumas from the past. It depends a lot on how they were raised. So let's get into it. And I promised myself I was not going to talk forever. So let me have a little peek at the time here, and let's try to keep this to 30 minutes or less. So essentially, what is co-regulation? So the art of co-regulation is learning how to exactly that, regulate. So regulate your nervous system with another person. So what tends to happen is, let's take an argument in a relationship, for example. So, and this is really where attachment styles come into play. Your upbringing comes into play, is really how you react when you're triggered, when you're upset by someone, if there is an argument or a conflict or something that feels like maybe it can't be resolved in the moment. What tends to happen is ultimately you usually have one person, let's say, for example, who, let's say they're really triggered and they're really upset and they have a very hard time soothing themselves. And for all the reasons I will get into shortly, they will look to another to help soothe themselves. So that's somebody who is used to, actually, maybe the opposite. That's somebody who's used to maybe growing up feeling quite anxious or scared. I can use myself for example. So I was a pretty nervous kid. I was a pretty fearful kid. And I was raised by two parents who were completely avoidant. So the king and queen of avoidance themselves. And again, I'm not saying this as a judgment. I say it all the time. They're wonderful in many ways, but they're completely disconnected from their own emotions because they were never taught how to self-soothe or taught that their parents would be there to soothe their emotions when they were kids. They never received that. So if you never received that, unless you're really working hard at breaking this idea of generational trauma and you want to do everything that your parents didn't do or weren't able to give you, that's amazing. Kudos to you. But a lot of parents, especially like old school generation parents, were really not in the game of like, yeah, let's work on our attachment styles and work on communication and co-regulation. That was not happening. So here I was, a very fearful kid. And when I mean fearful kid, I was scared of the weirdest shit. Like I had escape route plans from my home when I was going to get kidnapped. I would lie in bed completely obsessed that I was going to get kidnapped. I lived in the middle of like a very well-to-do area. Like nobody's coming to kidnap me. I don't even know where I got these ideas in my mind. But I had the escape route planned in my room, which window I was going to go out, how I was going to climb down the roof, and how I was going to escape. I would go on field trips at school, and I would be marking all of the buildings so that when we got lost, because I was convinced that we were going to get lost, that I would know how to get home from the markings of these buildings. Like I was like, I don't even know what I thought I was in my mind or how I was going to get home. But the really interesting slash sad part was that I was terrified of all of these things. But at the end of the day, I was so scared and I wanted to make sure that I would get home safely. But at the end of the day, being at home emotionally, not physically, not materially, emotionally was the most unsafe place that I could be. So it was quite confusing. So I didn't want to leave home, but then when I was home, I felt very lonely and misunderstood, and I would often keep everything inside because I felt like I couldn't go to my parents to talk to them about how I felt. So, needless to say, what happens is a very dysregulated nervous system starts to build, and then a person like myself, and I've talked to you guys at length about how I turn to substances, well, food first and then other illicit substances to soothe my insides because I felt so dysregulated. So what happens is when a child is not taught, because it's okay to be scared. It's okay to have all of these wacky ideas and feelings as a kid. But what parents really want to focus on is the safety of the child being able to come home and saying, hey, mom or dad, I was bullied today, or I'm having these strange thoughts, or I hate my body, or whatever it is. And knowing that their parents, and their parents don't have to be perfect at it, but knowing that they can come home to this home base and that it's going to be okay and that you're going to get soothed by another person. So that would look like co-regulation between a child and their parent. But when a child doesn't have that, they're going to grow up with a very dysregulated nervous system. And then they're often going to go to other things to try to soothe. So some people go to food, drugs, alcohol, shopping, overspending, gambling, sex addiction, relationship addiction, you name it. Basically, it's never really about the addiction, it's about how it makes us feel in the beginning, albeit it becomes very problematic, but in the moment, it's very soothing. Like nobody can say that a drink isn't soothing, that pot isn't soothing, that popping an Ativan isn't soothing. It's very fucking soothing. That's why people do it. But the problem is that if you don't have an off switch, it's gonna light your life on fire. So that's really where it's not a sustainable soothing method. So that's kind of like child A. And then you have child B, where let's say, for example, you have parents in the home that are maybe the opposite of my parents, who are overly emotional, who are overly consumed with themselves. It's all about them. There's always a drama going on. Maybe they're quite mean or nasty or very critical. So what happens is that child learns to not take up any space. So they come home and mom's in a mood. Maybe mom has a personality disorder or is an alcoholic or a narcissist, very self-centered. And the kid comes home and they either learn, okay, mom or dad, they're going through their thing. I better hide my needs. I better not take up too much space. So what happens is that child can become quite avoidant themselves. So they learn that if they have a feeling, if they have a problem, if they have whatever, to either pretend it's not there, so kind of turn it off. They have this off switch, or they can take it and kind of put it in a little box, tie it in a little bow, and put it on a shelf. I've always been quite fascinated by the idea of avoidance because I've never understood it. I don't want to say never, maybe like one thing. There's like one big thing in my life right now that I avoid because it's a bit too big and scary. But other than that, I've never had this ability to be like, "Oh, here's a problem and I'm just going to put it elsewhere and focus on something else." It's just not the way that my brain works. My brain can work on 10 different problems at the same time, and I can't really tuck one away. They all just kind of morph together. I also think that's kind of like the beauty of being a woman. Like women really like entangle everything, whereas men, they can usually put things aside and focus on one thing at a time. So what will happen with a more avoidant child is they can either be scared to bring anything up. So they learn to deal with it themselves. They learn to tuck it away. Maybe they have to take care of their siblings because they're parents have issues. Maybe they have to take care of their parents. Maybe they learn to actually have to morph into a parent at a very young age because their parents themselves are too emotionally immature to show up as a responsible parent. So these kids will more often than not turn into avoidance as they get older. And this is not demonizing avoidance. This is not demonizing anxious people. It just is what it is. People have they're strategies, right? Nobody chooses to be like, "Oh, I really feel like having a dysregulated nervous system." It's like, no, you didn't choose that. That's a strategy. It's learned behavior from X amount of years of however you were brought up. And the same thing with avoidance. So avoidance will often, they want to run. They don't want to feel the feeling, where the anxious person actually can't help but feel the feeling. So let's say we take those two people and then we put them in a relationship together. It's not a death sentence. It's not doesn't even really have to be problematic, but there will be some work that needs to be done, because if you have one person who is like, "Oh my God, I'm having a big feeling," and then you have another person that's saying, "Danger, danger, big feeling. I remember big feelings from mom or dad, and I went and I ran and hid when mom had a big feeling, and now all of a sudden there's a big feeling in front of me." That person's tendency is is going to want to go and run, right? And probably the worst thing you could do to an anxious person when they're really anxious is run, because they're going to take it super personally and they're looking for someone to help soothe them. Now, is it a healthy strategy? No, because you don't want to be overly dependent on another human to be able to soothe you. But if you're in a relationship with someone, for sure, they're going to have to come to a compromise, even if it's a compromise saying, like, "Girl, you're hella anxious right now. It's scaring the shit out of me. I don't know what to say. I don't want to say anything wrong. I'm going to go for a drive, but I will be back. I will be back. And maybe we won't talk about this tonight if you're still a 10 on 10, but I want to talk to you about this and we're going to talk about it tomorrow or whenever it is," right? So these are the types of language and strategies that we want to use with the art of co-regulation. But this idea of what do we do if there's two people with different communication styles or different attachment styles needing to co-regulate when either both people feel like shit or maybe one person feels like shit and the other one's fine, or maybe there's been an argument or whatever it is. First things first, I wouldn't start off with practicing co-regulation in an argument because that's just damage control. You can only do so much when somebody is hella activated. I don't really think, unless you have the ability to help the other person really calm down and the avoidant person is not completely shut down and you can get somewhere with a conversation, that's great. I don't think that that's going to happen the majority of the time. So, my first suggestion would be to practice talking about co-regulation when you're not activated and when you're not in a fight or when you're not in an argument, because both people are going to be calm and both people are going to be able to be more introspective around what they need. You can also do this as a solo activity. This is not just an episode for people who are in relationships. You can be single as well and really get to know your communication style or your attachment style even before you get into another relationship. But let's just say, for the first example, that there's two people in an argument, okay? And let's take one person who is feeling, because the tricky thing about anxious people is that their minds have been hijacked by the anxiety, and what's looping in their mind is, I need this problem to go away. I need this person to not be upset with me anymore. I need to get this resolved before I can feel okay again. Now, is it true? No, because what is the truth, right? Where nobody's coming to save you, nobody's going to be able to actually really calm you down. But when you're in a relationship with somebody, if you need something in that moment, for sure, I think it is a good idea to be able to learn what you guys need from each other. But if the anxious person can only learn how to self-soothe from the validation or from the comfort of another person, then we're going to have a problem. Because what an anxious person really wants to start to practice is learning how to self soothe before they learn how to co regulate. Otherwise, the anxious person is going to show up to every argument, every fight with a nuclear weapon on their shoulder, and their anxiety is going to be so intimidating, so overwhelming to the other person. And they don't have to be avoidant. I'm just using avoidant just because it's easier. But let's just say they're whatever, they're more neutral. They don't express a lot of emotion, or they like to keep the peace, or big feelings scare them, whatever it is. So it doesn't have to be like a classic avoidant person, but let's just say they're not anxious at all. That's going to look like a tidal wave coming at somebody, especially if the other person, the more neutral, avoidant person, has a lot of their own insecurities, fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough, right? Because the anxious person, you can really tell that they have all of these things because they're basically wearing a sign on their forehead that they have all these things and they're really anxious. But the avoidant person or the more neutral person is really tricky because they don't look like they're feeling a lot. In fact, they might look like they're not feeling anything. And that also can be really triggering for an anxious person because the other person is like, do you even care? Do you want to have this conversation? Like, what's going on? And I remember a long time ago, I when I really wanted to start to manage what I had experienced as a child. So there's four of us in my family. I have a very small family. I don't have a lot of distant relatives. I don't even have a cousin. I don't even have one cousin. I just want one cousin. I don't borrow one of your guys' cousins. It's very annoying. So I started to get very fascinated because the three other people in my family are complete avoidance. Like they don't talk, like they would rather get, which is my worst fucking nightmare. They would rather get into an argument and not talk for 3 weeks or 4 weeks until it blows over, and then they just start talking again, but then they never talk about the argument. That's fucking wild to me. Wild. Oh my God, I hate that so much. Like, I'm all about people needing to cool down. That's fine. But like 3 weeks of silence, 4 weeks of silence, and then we're never even going to talk about it? No, 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 no. It just doesn't work for me. I can't stand it. It felt like I could feel the energy in my home and it was crippling for me. I hated the tension. It felt poisonous. Like it felt like everybody was always mad at each other and nobody was saying anything and nobody could say how they really felt. And I guess that gene just skipped me and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna feel everything for everybody because I can't do this. I can't do this whole kind of like shut down, ignore the elephant in the room thing. So I'll just like scream it off a rooftop how I'm actually feeling. So I don't think that that's healthy at all, but we have to really understand what's happening in the moment. And I remember when I started to get very curious about it, I started to literally like survey avoidance. I wanted to know what was going on during one of their shutdowns. And the feedback I got was awesome and it was actually quite comforting. I remember I had one friend tell me that when he feels overwhelmed by, I think it was like his partner or whoever's emotions, that he would actually go blank and he would go blank and he wouldn't know what to say. So his next best option was to just book it. And I was like, fuck, really? Like, there's nothing going on upstairs, like at all? And he was like, no, nothing. I would get so intimidated by the person's emotions, and it would either remind him of like mom or whatever, and he couldn't collect his thoughts. So he would just leave. And I'm like, oh, no wonder this doesn't work well, right? Because to somebody who is like crying or expressing their emotions and the other person just leaves, oh man, what a fucking disaster. So it brought me a lot of comfort because I'm like, oh, you don't have any control over this. So kind of like an anxious person in the moment doesn't have a lot of control. Like you can't tell an anxious person in the moment to just not be anxious anymore. Like they're searching for something. But it's also the same with avoidance. You can't tell an avoidant, "Hey, can you please feel more right now and can you please talk more right now," when they really don't have anything going on in their heads. It would be impossible. So first things first is really understanding which one you are. So if you're more anxious, we have to know that, right? We want to know that before we go into a relationship. You know, the coolest part about like more secure people, and this has really been my goal and I guess I've done a lot better in certain situations, usually situations that are very unhealthy for me. I can't control it and I'll get very anxious still. But other ones, like a securely attached person can watch somebody else kind of be anxious or freak out and be like, hey, bro, go deal with your stuff right now. And when you're ready to be calm and talk, I'll be right here. Like they really have this ability to stay separate from it or they don't take it personally. And more often than not, those securely attached people grew up with parents who were there for them, who were really able to be like, it's okay, whatever you need, we're here, we're going to talk, we're going to figure this out. So their nervous system is not shot. Their nervous system is really calm. So all of these outside factors are not threatening their sense of safety or sense of self. So ultimately on both sides of the coin is really how do we get to this place where we're not completely triggered by one another. So for the anxious person really needs to practice the art of regulating themselves. Because, like I said earlier, if you're constantly walking around the world and you're only going to be okay if you are getting validation, if you are having the big talk with somebody, if you are getting attention, if you're getting this, then what happens when you're not? Because there's going to be periods in life where you're just not getting those things. And if you're not able to soothe yourself without another person around, you might be putting yourself in a more kind of dangerous, vulnerable position. So the anxious person is really the one who should be practicing, okay, I'm having a huge feeling right now. And instead of just like launching at your partner or a friend, I mean, people can do it with their friends, people can do it with their parents, they can do it with coworkers. there's basically no pause. There's no pause between what they're thinking and feeling and what's about to come out of their mouth. And that can be really intense when you're activated. So that would be the first thing, is really saying like, and this is the cool part about co-regulation, is that just language, the language that you use is so important. And the anxious person's biggest fear is that they're going to be abandoned, or they're going to be fundamentally rejected for what they're feeling or what they're saying, because that was their experience growing up. Especially if you've been raised by a narcissist, your nervous system is completely shot and is has been taught to be met with a wall when you express yourself, or worse, be gaslit. So have your reality completely flipped upside down, and it leaves you questioning what you just experienced or what the hell just happened, right? So you're like, hey, so and so, I'm feeling really upset about yesterday. And they're like, what are you talking about? Or like, you're so sensitive, right? So anybody who's grown up with that is going to be quite susceptible to fears of abandonment or fears of rejection. Now, again, is that your partner's responsibility to fix for you? No. But at the same time, I do believe that compromise is really, really important in relationships. And, these things, attachment styles and our insecurities, they're just parts of us. They're not all of us. So if you love a person enough, then it's going to be important to say, okay, when these parts of you come up, how should I best handle this situation? And that's where true compromise can come in. And it's not about being perfect. It's not going to work 10 on 10 every time. But there are a lot of very comforting things that you can say. And I'll also talk about the really like the hard no's of like what not to do, which is also really hard when two people are upset. But so let's take the anxious person, for example. They're having a really big feeling after a fight. They're nervous. They're nervous that you're shut down or you're going to walk away or that you're never going to come back. So first things first, we really want to ask ourselves, how upset are we right now? Because if we're unable to articulate if we're a 10 on 10 or not, then chances are, I don't know about any of you, but like when I've been really anxious in the past or really mad, or PMSing is the worst for me. Like I really had to realize that I have to tell people like, hello, here's my 3 day countdown. My hormones will now be taking over for the next 3 days. Please don't trust anything that I have to say, and please just leave me alone. Right? Like that is not the time for me to start a fight. And I literally had no concept of that in my 20s and no control over it. And it was not good. It was not good. It was not good for me. It was not good for my partners at the time. It was just like a hijacking situation that I felt was uncontrollable. So now if somebody wants to have a bigger talk with me around that time, I really try to avoid it, because I honestly don't feel like I'm in my right mind. It's a very scary feeling. I feel like the exorcist has taken over my body, and I can't communicate with you properly. So if you're not PMSing, and let's just say you're hella pissed or you're really anxious that your partner's doing X, Y, and Z, ask yourself. I always use a scale, right? So everybody knows the 1 to 10, 0 to 10 scale. Ask yourself, how upset am I right now? Because if you're a 10 on 10, I wouldn't even bother trying to have the conversation. And so many people say to me, oh, I go from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. It's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You were cruising at a 6 or 7, and now you're at a fucking 10. There's no way you're going from 0. Who has ever been a 0 and then all of a sudden 10, unless you're getting attacked or there's an animal chasing you, right? There's no reason for you to be happy as a clam, super peaceful at a 0, and then all of a sudden you're at a 10. No, that doesn't happen unless you're like in an extreme example. So really checking in and saying, whoa, okay, my anxiety is 10 on 10 right now. How do I express that to my partner without throwing them under the bus? And there's many ways to do that, right? Because essentially, what do both people want in times of conflict? They both want to feel safe, but they're both probably hella threatened by how the other one's acting. So if I'm a 10 on 10, for example, I could say to the other person, hey, I'm feeling this way right now. I'm going to go for a walk. Or maybe I would even do that first. Go for a walk. I could call a friend, call a support that I'm not going to feel threatened by, do some deep breathing, and then approach the other person. Hey, so and so, I'm feeling X, Y, and Z because of the conversation that we had. I know it's probably not factual, but here are the thoughts going on in my head. What do you think about talking about it? Now, if the other person, let's say, who might be fearful of your anxiety or threatened by your anxiety or is scared that you're going to criticize them or that they've done something wrong, if in that example, like, here's what not to do. Like, if the other person is like, oh my God, you always want to talk. We're always talking. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing to talk about. That's You definitely don't want, if you want the relationship to go anywhere, you definitely don't want to say that to an anxious person. Now, if the anxious person is coming to you every second day for 3 years and they want to have this talk, okay, yes, then we have a bigger problem. But let's just say this is happening 3 times a year. Probably the worst thing that you could say is something about their anxiety or that they're always anxious or they're always sensitive or they're always complaining about something. Both people are going to shut down immediately. But let's say the more kind of neutral avoidant person really isn't in the mood to talk, but they care about the other person and they want to express that to them, then they could say something like, hey, I'm really sorry you're feeling super anxious right now. I haven't had the best day. I'm feeling particularly shut down right now. It has nothing to do with you, but how about we talk about this tomorrow? Because what the anxious person really wants is they don't necessarily need to talk in that exact moment unless it's an emergency. They don't need to talk in that exact moment, but they want to know when they can co-regulate with you. So it's important to give, it doesn't have to be a specific day or time, but it's important to give them an idea of when that can happen. So, hey, I'm super shut down today. I had a really bad day. I'm not going to be able to access any of my emotions. Let's say it's a Wednesday. But how about you and I go for breakfast on Saturday morning and we talk about this when we have the time and we're both not working? Okay, that's a compromise. That can work. Because also, too, anxious people, and I needed to learn this the hard way, and maybe this goes into like my bratty background a little bit, is that we don't always get what we want in the moment. Right. And we can kick and scream all we want, but that doesn't magically make somebody available to talk to you in that moment. So then you're left with all of these big feelings. You're going to have to figure out how to bring that down. So basically, this art of co-regulation is really thinking about when are you guys trying to co-regulate, doing a check-in before you try to co-regulate. Like, I loved Brene Brown did this interview and she said that her and her husband, when they come home, they tell each other how much they have left in the tank. So she gave an example. I don't know exactly how much it was, but she came home and she was like, "Hey, babe, I'm at 30%." And he's like, "Oh, hey," he's like, "I'm at a 70%." That's cool. That's really cool because then somebody at 70 could be more supportive that evening, could cook the dinner, could take care of the kids, could uh, think of something she may need or whatever it is. So I really like that one, is really coming home at the end of the day and letting each other know how much they have in the tank, because we also want to depersonalize it, right? Anxious people are pretty brutal for taking things personally. So you want to depersonalize the fact that the other person could have a bad day. It has nothing to do with them. But at the same time, where can we meet in the middle? So I like that check-in at the end of the day. And like I said before, is really just figuring out when you are trying to co-regulate. So number one, non-negotiable, do not try to co-regulate if you're both hella pissed, right? I mean, you can try, but that's not where I would be practicing the co-regulation because it's really hard, again, to tap into what you actually need in that moment. So I would try to have these conversations about co-regulation when you're not mad and you're not activated, you'll get a lot further. And when you do have those talks, get to know each other. Get to know each other without taking it personally, right? So get to know the more avoidant leaning person, ask them questions, and try not to tell the other person what they're feeling. Asking questions is literally my superpower. And I always recommend it to clients. I always recommend it to people because asking questions is probably the least threatening thing that you can do. When you tell someone, hey, you made me so mad when you walked away, or you can't walk away in our relationship, or you can't be this shut down in our relationship, that's like a death sentence. When you ask questions, like when I started to interview avoidance, you get met with a lot more openness. So, like, hey, I really want to tackle this co-regulation thing with you. Can you explain to me what it's like for you when you get home from work? Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And the other person gets to be like, "Oh, okay, well, when I've worked all day at whatever they do for a living, let's take myself, for example, when I see clients all day, if I were to open the door and be met, actually not even with an argument, with it's probably why I'm very single. I can't handle, I'm so like the tank is, I can't even tell you how empty it is that I cannot talk to anybody for like at least an hour, right? So I would have to tell the person, and I have, and sometimes it's gone well and sometimes it's not gone that well, but to tell the person that I need to go to my room or I need an hour of silence before I'm able to come out and talk to anybody. So if you're asking this person, like, what do you need when you come home from work? And the person is like, oh, I'm glad you asked. I really want to spend time with you, but I need an hour to go work out, or I need an hour to decompress, or it may look like I'm grumpy and I'm hiding in my room, but I'm not. I'm just refilling the tank. So when you start to get this information, you're like, oh, okay, that's what they need to be better in the relationship. We have to remember that, right? Like having these conversations is to become better. It's not to attack, it's not to pull away from the person. It's saying, like, how can we both be our authentic selves and still show up for each other and still meet in the middle? So you get to start to ask the person questions about co-regulating. So, like, yeah, when is the best time to talk to you about stuff? Like, my peak hours are in the morning. Most people hate the morning. I could have a full-blown conversation at 6 a.m. about feelings if somebody wanted to. I am jazzed in the morning. I don't know why. And I'm not at night. It's not the time to hit me up with anything. At night, my brain is like complete mush. I'm not a night owl. I'm usually in bed by 9:30 p.m. and it's just not my time. So, getting to know myself at a deep level, not everybody's going to want to have a conversation at 6 o'clock in the morning, but like, a daytime-ish conversation. And I would have to articulate that to someone. So, you know, step number one, don't do it while you're fighting. Step number two, ask questions, get to know the other person's needs because they may be wildly different than yours. And that's hard. It's just not easy. It's not easy to wrap your head around how somebody can express or feel things so differently. But again, if you really care about this person, it's really important to be able to know that information so that you guys can get somewhere with these talks. And then the final thing is if you're going to articulate what you need, just try, and I'm talking about in relationships right now, try to be mindful of the other person. So if a super anxious person is hella anxious and they really want to talk, try to be mindful of the fact that maybe the other person is just so checked out or so numb or so overwhelmed or so scared that they're unable to talk at the moment. If you use language like that, like, hey, I noticed that you're really shut down, so maybe today's not the best time to talk, but can you please let me know when we can talk? That's going to be the best way to handle those types of situations. And with a more avoidant leaning person that needs to ask the anxious person for something, is really saying to them, like, hey, I really want to have these conversations when we're both a little bit more calm because when you are anxious and it has nothing to do with you, but it really reminds me of my mom, for example, or my dad, for example. And when they got anxious, they would take up all the air in the room and they would just end up criticizing me, and I would feel like shit, and the conversation would go nowhere. And I learned to shut down as a kid. So when you're anxious, that's all I see. And then I just go into my cave. And then the anxious person is like, oh, wow, I didn't know that, right? But here's what not to do. Oh, you're so anxious all the time. You remind me of my mother. Don't do that, right? Because that is just, oh my God, that's going to start a hella fight. And it's just it's just blaming at that point, right? And it's just not, but it's hard too. It's really hard to be soft when you're feeling threatened. Um, but it's just always easier to just take a moment, pause, and say, hey, when this happens, I feel this way because A, B, and C. And that takes practice and it takes skill. I'm not gonna lie, it's not an easy thing to do. And when people are upset, unfortunately, things come flying out. But really trying to explain to the other person why you're feeling so shut down and when you can reconnect. Because that's all they really want is the reconnection. One of the worst things that you can do to an anxious person is rupture the relationship and then not repair it. It's probably the worst thing because what that is, it's emotional whiplash. It's a conflict just happened, and because they don't avoid, they don't tuck it anywhere, so they're just left with it. And it stews and it stews and it stews and it stews and it stews, and they don't have anywhere to put it. Where an avoidant person can have a conflict and then they can, like I said earlier, take it and wrap it in a little box and put a little bow on it and put it on a shelf. And they can do that for years. They could probably do that forever because taking that box off the shelf is so terrifying for them, right? But that's really difficult because now you have two completely different people, and being on the more anxious side, more ruminating side, more obsessive side, it's really a bad place to be because that can take months before that settles down because it just gets locked in your nervous system that was very dysregulated from a child. So it's really, really not healthy to put either people in that type of situation without the idea of repair. You always want to have the rupture. Ruptures are not unhealthy. They're very common. They're actually healthy in relationships. People who say that they never fought once, they freak me out. So this idea of rupture, fine, but how are we going to repair? It is the most important part of co-regulation, of being in a relationship and being in a friendship, coworkers. If you do not have the ability to repair, it's a dangerous game because then you start doing what I said my parents did, just sweep everything under the rug. Or, I mean, people tell me they just like wake up the next day and they just go back to status quo like nothing happened. And that really freaks me out because it's like that book, like the body keeps the score. That does not just disappear, that goes somewhere. And either resentment's going to start building. I believe that like physical ailments can start happening, disease, chronic pain, inflammation, all of this can be a result of stored emotion in the body. So the last most important thing is really focusing on that repair. Learn how both parties feel comfortable repairing. Now, that doesn't mean that the avoidant person has to be like, okay, we're gonna repair this tomorrow because you're very anxious. No, don't force yourself to do anything, but do figure out a time that you're going to be able to reconnect. Otherwise, you're going to have two very unhappy people at the end of the day. So figure out where your ruptures, and also too, if you're stuck in a pattern of the same rupture happening over and over and over again, I fundamentally believe that you're not talking about the core issue. Right? If you're just arguing over like socks on the floor, socks on the floor, socks on the floor, socks on the floor, it's not about the socks on the floor. It's not about the socks on the floor. So you either have one person feels like they're not being heard, like, hey, I mentioned to you, like, whatever, I have this thing with tidiness or cleaning, and just throw them in the hamper or throw them on the chair. So the person's either not feeling heard, maybe they're not feeling respected, maybe they're not, it's really never the surface level problem. So take a look at what rupture keeps happening over and over again. And then when you're not in active volcanic rupture and you're just feeling good and you're having dinner, bring it up. Be brave. Be brave. Take a risk and say, hey, you and I keep butting heads over this thing over and over again. And, we're having a cute, cozy dinner. Why don't we talk about it and try to come up with some compromise? So try to have these difficult conversations outside of any heated feelings. And I truly believe that's going to help you fundamentally understand this person, right? Because if an avoidant says, like, oh man, you're too much for me right now. I'm going for a drive, but I love you and I will be back in a couple of hours. Perfect. That's going to help a lot. And the avoidant person might not understand that because they don't get off on the idea. Avoidants are really good. Well, really good. They're masters of self-regulating. They actually need to go and be alone in order for them to figure out or try to figure out what just happened or what's going on. They believe staying alone is safer and not having the conversation is safer and not being vulnerable and not speaking up is safer for all of the reasons that I mentioned before. But then if you're with an anxious person, it's you're gonna butt heads all the time because it's not how the other person operates. The other person is looking to you for some emotional safety. So get curious, ask each other what you guys need on a happier day. And yeah, really figure out this idea of like, okay, where do we keep getting stuck and how do we repair? How does the anxious person get okay with the avoidant needing a little bit of alone time? And how does the avoidant get better at communication and feeling not threatened by feelings or emotions? You guys both have to really work on the sense of safety and developing that sense of safety in the home or between each other. So I hope I answered my friend's question or my friend's partner's question. As always, leave any comments or questions in the comments of the show notes or send me a message directly if you have any more hot topics that you want me to talk about. And I will see you all in the next episode. Love you guys. Bye. Thanks everyone for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.